Unless your name's Ilya Carey, you don't need to do 5 A levels.
Today we have a very special guest. We have my dear friend Kaiyang, who studies medicine at Oxford. We also went to school together. And I've got a few questions for you. Some I wrote and others people on Instagram asked. So first up, can you tell us about your course, please?
Yeah, of course. Lovely to be here, first of all, Ilya. Thanks for having me. So my course is medicine. It's a 6-year course at Oxford and Cambridge. And then to kind of break it down briefly, it is broken down into 2 halves. The first half is kind of preclinical in the sense that it's very kind of science orientated, lecture heavy, textbook heavy, so to speak. And in the last 3 years, there's an emphasis on clinical teaching in hospitals. So at the moment, I'm in the 3rd year where we're it's a bit different to our 1st and 2nd years, which are kind of heavily based on lectures, learning and materials. It's more kind of based on following your interest, but also understanding kind of primary papers to a deeper extent, so to speak. And then so I'm in 3rd year's going in K at the moment, and I'm looking forward to 4th year, which is when we'll start being in hospitals.
Great, thank you. And why is it that you chose medicine?
So I think going back all the way to year 10, I think year 10 or 11, there wasn't a defining moment for me where I decided to do medicine. And I think that's one thing which is completely fine. A lot of people feel like they need a life-changing experience, but that normally probably doesn't happen. And for me, it was just I reached that point as a consequence of thinking about what I enjoyed at the time, and that was the sciences. But also at the side, I was doing kind of volunteering out of school, and I found that really rewarding. At the time, I was doing, I think, kind of first aid stuff with the Red Cross, and then so my main interests at that point were biology, chemistry, kind of first aid, and it was quite a natural link, I think, to go from that to wanting to do medicine. And obviously, I think a lot of people in year 10 or 11, they jump to medicine straight away, but then I think it requires a lot of thought because it is a long course. It's very much a kind of vocational area or vocational topic. And I think after consideration, after thinking about what the course would entail, but also in the bigger picture, what I would be doing post university, I think I arrived at the conclusion that medicine was for me, so to speak.
That's great. It looks like you thought a lot about it.
Lots of thinking, yeah. I'm always thinking.
And which A-levels did you study at school, and which ones would you recommend for students who want to study medicine at Oxford?
Okay, so firstly, unless your name's Ilya Carey, you don't need to do 5 A-levels. That's fine. You can just do 3. So I think something before I delve into what ones I did. Well, it was biology, chemistry, maths, so very standard. Before I go into details, I think one thing that's really important to note is that a lot of people find themselves in a situation where they're doing 3 or 4 A-levels in year 12, and they've got the decision to either drop one and focus on 3, or do one for an AS level or continue all 4. And this was a decision I definitely faced. I was doing German, Deutsch, as my fourth subject in year 12, and then I kind of reached a point where I thought it'd be beneficial to try and do 4 and try and get kind of good marks in 4 exams. It might boost my chances, so to speak, but I could definitely speak from my experience at the time, and I'd assume it's still the same, given that the entry offer is just 3A or 1A star, 2A's, or 2A stars, 1A, so 3 subjects is probably better, unless you really enjoy the 4th or you think it's going to really benefit you in the long term. Just for the sake of maximizing your chances, it's probably best just to focus on 3, do those 3 really well. But once again, it comes down to what you think you can handle and what you enjoy. And in terms of the 3 that I picked at the time, when I did the subject, I think chemistry was kind of requisite and it's essential for medicine courses generally at Oxford for sure. And then I think it was either one of biology or maths as another subject they wanted. So biology, chemistry, maths is the typical 3 you go for, but I know plenty of people who've done, say, history or English as another A-level as well. And actually that's not a bad thing, because essay writing is an important skill for Oxford medicine. in particular.
Okay. So I hear sometimes people are unsure about taking physics A-level or further maths maybe. Now, in your third year, you probably have come across a lot of content. Do you think it would have been a good idea to take physics or further maths A-level?
I think, to be fair, if I look back upon kind of the 2 years that I've been doing medicine up to and including this year, so this third year, there aren't many occasions where either biology, chemistry, or maths have directly fallen into what we've learned. Obviously, there are kind of important foundations, especially in biology, but I don't think anyone should consider themselves at a disadvantage if they haven't done physics or maths, so to speak. And in my experience, physics could have been quite helpful in first year for a couple of brief topics. But I think the biggest thing for those two areas, further maths and physics, is if you enjoy it, do it. And if it's something you don't enjoy, then don't worry. It's not going to be the be all and end all in terms of medicine at uni.
That's great, thank you. And next question is, how important do you think GCSEs are for medicine at Oxford?
So for medicine at Oxford, they are probably, so I'm speaking from my personal experience. I don't know if it's changed since then, but I'd imagine it'd be fairly similar. I think GCSEs are probably the most valued at Oxford for medicine, Oxford medicine, than any other uni, because the way they do their selection criteria and kind of narrow down people for interview, from off the top of my head, I think it's like 50% GCSEs, 50% BMAT, and to pick who goes to interview. So I think it's one of those where if you have really good GCSEs already, it's something on your side, an advantage. But then again, if you look at most of the unis, including Cambridge, at the time I was applying, they don't really consider GCSEs at all. So it's once again, it's not the be all and end all. And then I think the caveat that I'll add is that with GCSEs, it's all contextualized in the sense that if you come from a school who no one's ever got an A star before and then you suddenly get 4, that's probably weighted that's kind of considered in that context, as opposed to if you were at a school that churns out, A stars for fun, and A stars, they're oxygen, then obviously it's still good if you get 11 A stars, but it's got to be taken in context. So yeah.
Yeah, very true. Next up is about the BMAT. Do you have any tips or suggestions about how to do well on the BMAT, and also what BMAT score you think is good and we need for Oxford?
So the BMAT, for those who don't know, is traditionally used by Oxbridge medicine courses, but also some other unis. I think the London unis tend to use it, so Imperial, UCL, etc. And then I think maybe Leeds and I think Lancashire, but that it kind of changes year on year. And in terms of the BMAT, I think if we break it down quickly, the first section is based on kind of logic and how you can logic, but also analysis of kind of texts, like short paragraphs, and then questions like which of these best sums up this paragraph, which of these is the biggest weakness to this paragraph, etc. The second half is based on science GCSE questions across biology, chemistry, and physics, and the third one's you just write a one page long essay. So if we take them step by step, with the first part in terms of logic, I think this is the one which is probably most difficult to train for, so to speak, to learn things for, if that makes sense. But this is the biggest one where exam technique really comes into play, and also practice comes into play. So at the time, and I'm sure this is still the case, you can access all the BMAT papers from, I think, 2005. And I think I sat down and tried to do most of them. And then, although the questions, they get progressively harder, the more kind of recent papers are. But you can see that although it's not exactly the same question, they're probing at the same things over and over again. And then so although you might come across a question that's really hard to begin with, you see that it appears in one form or another, slightly different shape. So the biggest one for the first part is just practice, and then you'll kind of work your way around the logic. The second one is the scientific section. On the BMAT website, I think there's an actual kind of online scientific textbook they give you, which covers like kind of the core info that you might need to know. So that was really good, and I actually used that as my kind of firm base. But then in addition, there might have been, I think, a kind of BMAT Section 2 specification. But even if not, the textbooks are a really good place to start, and I think you should readily find that online. And in terms of the third one, which is the essay, so with the essay, it can be really daunting and really difficult to do, but I think the best thing is, well, actually, I think if anything, it could actually end up being one of the easiest sections to prepare for, in the sense that if you're engaged with medical news, following up with kind of hot topics, so to speak, in medicine, then often you'll have lots of ideas to talk about, but also often a question will come up regarding kind of topical medical news. So I know the year before or 2 years before I did the BMAT, there were junior doctor strikes going on, and then the following year, the question was, I think, is it ethical for junior doctors to strike or something like that. So very in keeping with the topical news that was going on. So yeah, I think that's briefly what I'd say about the three parts of the paper. But overall, the biggest kind of tip is just to practice the papers. Make sure you can understand why you've gone wrong, if you have gone wrong. And even if you got it right, just make sure you know why you got it right. So
that's great. And continue on that, what scores do you think would be good for Oxford?
I think it's difficult to say. I can speak about what I got. I think I got 5.9 in the first section, 6.1 in the second section, and then 3.5A for the essay. I think for the essay, if you just get a 3, I think it's kind of considered like the pass mark or a standard mark, and get a 3A, which I think is the A relates to, I think, grammar. And then for the rest of the sections, I think if you're getting, off the top of my head, if you're getting anywhere above 5, that's pretty good. But what I'd say is that I know plenty of people who've got below 5 and still got an interview and also got in. So that's the other thing. That's when they look at the weightings, because they also look at GCSEs. So it's kind of like a second shot. So if you've got really good GCSEs and your A levels, maybe, or your BMAT, sorry, not as good as you would have liked it, it's not necessarily the end of the world. The thing I would say though is on the Oxford Medicine admissions, they'll have like a breakdown of who got in each year and roughly what score they got in the BMAT, and also in GCSE. So therefore you can kind of contextualize yourself amongst the previous cohort and then see, okay, with my score in the BMAT, I'd have a decent chance, or actually, perhaps I haven't got the best chance based on my BMAT and GCSE scores, etc.
That's amazing, thank you. And then another very important part of your application is, of course, the personal statement. What kind of stuff did you write about in your personal statement, and do you have any tips for writing a personal statement for Oxford Medicine?
I think if we just, I'll talk about personal statement generally first, and then perhaps how we can tune it more towards Oxbridge. So generally, I think you want to talk about medicine and medical experiences for about 75%, as a rough figure, ballpark figure. And then within that, it doesn't just have to be any hospital experience you've acquired. And I think this is quite an important point to raise, in the sense that a lot of people think that they have to have, 6 months of hospital work experience where they've witnessed a heart surgeon, perform like 70 transplants. It's unrealistic to expect a year 11 or 12 student to have that experience. And so what I would say is that even if you don't have any hospital experience, I mean, I only had, I think, just over a week, you can still take the initiative and find healthcare settings which you can volunteer in. Obviously, I know it's going to be a lot more difficult now in the current pandemic, but hopefully you still would have been able to have opportunities, or still can get involved in opportunities. So for instance, I volunteered in a care home. That's considered work experience, and I would actually argue that it's a better form of work experience, because you're actively getting involved as opposed to passively observing in a hospital. And then also I did first aid. So collectively, they were kind of 3 things I could talk about. And the good thing is I could talk about them on my personal statement, but also when it came to interview, I had lots of different experiences and skills that I'd learned across those 3 commitments. So I was kind of building up a healthy wealth of experience, so to speak. And so that covers the work experience side of it. And then the other section of the personal statement, maybe just 1 or 2 paragraphs, is just detailing anything you do outside of medicine, perhaps, such as sports, volunteering, etc. And then coming back now to the Oxford or Cambridge personal statement in particular, I think it could be nice if you throw in particular areas of medicine that you're interested in, particularly perhaps books you've read, perhaps particular topics you find interesting, but also any research you've done into that topic, any like science projects you've been involved in. I think these are the sorts of areas which will be quite that can help you stand out. But also, I think a lot of Oxbridge admission tutors will be looking for that as an extra. It's not a prerequisite, but it shows that you're inquisitive, engaged, and you have a sense of perhaps direction or a sense of interests that you want to pursue.
That's very detailed, thank you. And then, of course, your interview. What was your interview like, and do you have any interview tips?
So my interview, I had 2 interviews at Wadham. 2 interviews at Wadham College, which is where I applied, and 3 interviews the morning after at Merton, which is where I ended up. So there is no kind of kind of archetype or like mold for an Oxford interview, so to speak. It's very varied, but from my experience, mostly based on sciences and kind of a general good understanding of GCSE and to an extent A-level biology, chemistry, maths, physics, etc. But even if you don't do any one of those subjects, it's still fine. Yes, so that was generally being tested in 4 out of 5 of my interviews. But one of my interviews, which I did, was more kind of ethics-based, and in ethics-based, but also based on kind of topical medical news. So then once again, that draws back into this idea of kind of keeping up to date with what's going on in the medical surrounding, and also being generally aware of kind of important medical ethical issues, and also important medical ethical cases. So, for instance, the case of, I think, Charlie Gard, the young baby, I think 2 or 3 years ago, was something that popped up at my interview as just a kind of an ethical situation. So I'm sure something like the pandemic will be or pandemic related questions will be fired, and in many years to come as well.
Great, thank you. And then after your interview, you got your offer. What is the offer that you got?
So the offer that I got was a A-star AA, which is, I think, what they typically give up at Oxford's medicine. I think Cambridge is A-star, A-star A. And yeah, they didn't specify what subjects they needed to be in. And so it was a nice day getting the offer, but also it's a bit there's pressure, to try and meet the grades, but most, if not all, people will get there eventually.
Great. And do you have any general application tips for students applying to Oxford Medicine?
Firstly, you've made the right choice to apply for Oxford. I think my general advice is that, firstly, just make sure that so this is something that's always baffled me, is that when the Oxford release their admissions, there's always a group of people each year who, despite never sitting the BMAT, still apply to Oxford. And that's a bit of a kind of a trivial case, and there's only a few people, but the overriding important message is that make sure you've kind of, obviously it's good to believe in yourself, but make sure realistically you've got a good chance if you're applying, in the sense that look at your GCSEs compared to perhaps the previous year statistics, perhaps in the context of in your school or college, look at your BMAT score, and then if you think you've got even half a chance of getting an interview and getting in, then go for it. But if, say, your BMATs let you down a bit and your GCSEs weren't as good as you wanted them to be, then maybe consider applying for Cambridge or applying for other medical schools. Not as a kind of term of disrespect, but just more because I think Cambridge interview, I think 80% of students. So it seems to be that they use the interview more as a bigger discriminator than Oxford, who kind of seems to narrow down based on exams first, and then interview. So just thought I'd clear that one up. But yeah, I think because you get the opportunity to apply for 4 medical schools, if you feel like you've got even half a shot at either Oxford or Cambridge, and you think you'd enjoy the courses, I think it's well worth it.
Yeah, I think you're right in that Cambridge generally interviews a much higher proportion of candidates, so much more likely to be interviewed at Cambridge than you are at Oxford. Yeah. And then how hard would you say doing medicine at Oxford is based on your experiences so far?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think half my time so far has obviously been during the pandemic, so it's been a bit kind of distorted. But if I try and consider it just more generally, I think yeah, it is really hard at times. I think there are certain periods which are really tough. So the transition from A levels to first year is tough. Then kind of first year exams are quite intense. But what I'd say is that no one quite knows how. No one quite knows how, but everyone gets through it. Whether it's kind of working together or just can you find something within yourself, or actually you actually know more than you think you do. Like everyone will get through it, and it will make the hard times seem worth it for sure. But if you kind of follow the same attitude and application that's kind of got you there, then you'd be in a really solid position, kind of going through the course, and most importantly, you'd enjoy it. I don't really know what I expected to happen or for like medicine at Oxford to be like when I applied, but all in all, in terms of the bigger picture, I can say I've really enjoyed it so far, and I'm hopeful that the next kind of 3 years will be even better.
That's great. I think one of the main things which surprises people, including me, when they go to Oxford is just the workload. You don't really appreciate beforehand how intense it is. Like for me at least, I found that going to Cambridge doing my course is so much more intense than A levels, for example. I guess you might have had a similar experience.
Well, no, because I only did 3 A levels and you did 5, so didn't have the same experience. But no, I completely get what you mean. It's it definitely puts things into perspective. You know, when you were worrying about GCSEs and A levels, and obviously at the time they're the biggest things in your life, so they're bound to kind of have most of your attention and most of your kind of dedication. But yeah, I think it's completely beyond the imagination in terms of like how much you actually get through. And I think it's one of those things where when you're in the midst of it, you don't really realize, but then when you take a step back, then you realize it's a big step up in terms of intensity. But I guess whilst the intensity increases, hopefully the enjoyment also is there, in the sense that like this is something you signed up to do. It's tough, no one's denying that, but it's something which you'll especially find rewarding when you do get through it. So yeah.
And I guess as a student at Oxford, you must have a lot of great study tips. Are there any tips you think are worth sharing?
I don't know if I have any good study tips. I think one thing is that, you know, everyone has their own way of doing things, and obviously, like I'm always receptive and open to like kind of new ideas, new strategies, so to speak. But I think everyone needs to remember that often, or always, you'll know yourself the best. And what I mean by that is that what might work for someone, what might be kind of disastrous for someone else. So I think always try and have faith in your methods. If it's blatantly not working, then, you know, try and openly adapt, talk to people around you. You know, you can definitely kind of feed off of and try and get advice from other people. But I think the biggest thing, and I mean, I've definitely suffered for it, is just try and be confident in yourself. Just remember that you've managed to get this far, you know, get to uni, a really good uni, into a really good course. And I think everyone has moments where they doubt themselves. You know, I still have that, you know, in third year. But there'll always be there people around you to kind of support you, but also you should rest assured that you're more than capable of, you know, getting through it, no matter how hard it gets.
That's very nice. Yeah. We're nearly at the end. I'll just add that, Kaiyang, you do offer tutoring, don't you? So I'll put your contact details in the description so people can get to you if they want to be tutored by you. But yeah, those are all the questions I have. But if there's anything else you'd like to say, go for it.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me, Leah. It's good. It's good to see. Good to catch up. And yeah, I hope everyone's found that informative and useful. Feel free to message me, or can email me or whatever. Maybe I can give my contact details to Ilya. And yeah, I wish you all the best in your endeavours. And maybe I'll see you one day in Oxford. Yeah. Okay.
That's great. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Cheers, Ilya. Bye.